Welcome, dear listeners, to Whispers in the Dark, where shadows tell stories and the night breathes secrets. I'm your guide through the unknown, your storyteller in the silence, weaving tales that will haunt your thoughts long after the last word fades. Here, we embrace the eerie, the unsettling, the stories that lurk just beyond the edge of the firelight. So settle in, dim the lights, and listen closely. The darkness has something to say. The 8th haunting tale from Whispers in the Dark podcast is nearly here, and it's one that will haunt you long after the final whisper fades. So let's begin this horrifying tale. The Legion's Curse. The rolling fields of Lincolnshire stretched in all directions, golden under a mild summer sun. The land felt ancient, older than the weathered hedgerows or the ruins of stone farmhouses. It breathed history, and under its soil, something long forgotten stirred. The site had been chosen for its proximity to the old Roman road, Ermine Street, a patch of land unspoiled by modern construction. It was here, after months of planning, that Dr. Eleanor Hughes and her team had begun their excavation. By the 3rd week, they had uncovered fragments of pottery, rusted metal tools, and the remains of what looked like a collapsed stone outpost. Promising finds, but nothing extraordinary. Then, on the 22nd day, one of the graduate students called out. "Something solid here," he shouted, brushing carefully at the exposed edge. Eleanor moved quickly, kneeling beside him. The ground had given way to something more compact, more deliberate. A few hours of painstaking excavation revealed the upper torso of a skeleton, bones stained dark by centuries of earth. But what made her breath catch in her throat wasn't the bones. It was the armour. Bronze plates still clung to the ribcage. A gladius sword rested on the figure's right side, its hilt mottled with decay, but unmistakable in its form. And tucked beneath the left shoulder was the corroded disc of a shield boss. Metal, weathered and darkened by time, bore faint Latin etchings. Marcus Severus, Legio IX Hispana. Eleanor's blood turned cold. She'd read those names before, in speculation, in legend. The 9th Legion was one of the Roman Empire's great mysteries. Records showed them stationed in Britain, then nothing. No orders, no redeployment. They had simply vanished. She whispered aloud, This might be him." Behind her, Jacob Wright, one of her senior assistants, stepped closer, eyes wide. "The 9th was wiped out, wasn't it?" "That's the story." "Or they were abandoned," she replied. "No one knows. Until now, maybe." They marked the area for preservation and documented the find, but an unspoken tension crept through the team. The others were thrilled, but Eleanor noticed their enthusiasm falter as the sun sank behind the hills. Something about the unearthed skeleton disturbed them, not just its condition, but its presence. That night, the wind blew harder than usual. It whistled through the scaffolding, made the tents shudder. Eleanor lay in her cot, sleepless, listening to the murmur of unease around the camp. Twice she heard people step outside, whisper, return. And once she heard something else. From the direction of the trench came a soft scrape. Metal on stone, repeating, slow, rhythmic. She sat upright, heart pounding. The wind had paused, dead still now. The sound carried clearly through the night air. Scrape, scrape. She grabbed her coat, stepped outside. The excavation pit was dark. They'd left it covered for the night, tarps weighed down with sandbags. The lights on the perimeter flickered. 2 of them had gone out entirely. She frowned and moved toward them, the mud sucking at her boots. "Anyone out here?" she called. Her voice trembled despite her best effort. No answer. As she reached the edge of the trench, the smell hit her, faint at first, then stronger. Acrid, like smoke. Not cigarette smoke, but something older, denser. Burnt wood and scorched leather. She turned. Just for a second, she thought she saw someone standing by the excavation table. Tall, armoured, watching. She blinked. Nothing. Back in her tent, she tried to write notes in her journal, but her hand wouldn't stop shaking. Eventually, she drifted into a restless sleep, haunted by visions of marching boots, of howling men in the mist, of eyes staring through cracked iron helmets. Morning brought no peace. Jacob didn't show up for breakfast. One of the others checked his tent and screamed. He was inside, pale and cold. His eyes were wide open, blood vessels burst, mouth gaping in an expression frozen in raw terror. His fingers were curled as though clawing at something unseen. There were no wounds, no sign of a struggle. The coroner would later list it as sudden cardiac arrest. Eleanor knew better. The team buried him that afternoon, stacking stones in a solemn cairn at the edge of the site. No one spoke much. A few whispered of curses, of ancient protections disturbed. One of the younger students packed up and left before nightfall. That evening, Eleanor sat by the fire, staring at the carved letters in her notebook. Marcus Severus, Legio IX Hispana. She flipped through a battered reference text. Accounts of the Ninth varied. Some claimed they were lost in Caledonia, others in internal revolt. A few hinted at darker things. Rumours of mutiny, betrayal, a cohort sealed in, sacrificed to cover a failure. One legend stood out, a survivor, one man. Left behind, buried alive in disgrace, his name struck from the rolls. He swore vengeance, not just on the commanders who betrayed them, but on any who dared desecrate their bones. Thunder rumbled in the distance. She closed the book. That night, she didn't sleep. At midnight, her tent turned cold. Not cool, but frozen, her breath misting before her. And then she saw him. He stood at the flap, unmoving. His armour was torn and blackened. His left arm was missing below the elbow. His face, what remained of it, was a death mask of rotten bone. One eye burned red. Smoke drifted from his wounds like breath from a furnace. He didn't speak. He simply stared. Then his mouth opened, and a voice echoed into her mind. Not spoken aloud, a whisper buried in her skull.
Reality somos, nos clamar mores mortuos es.
We were betrayed. We died screaming. She screamed, fell backwards, scrambled out of the tent. But when she looked up, the figure was gone. No one else saw him. She didn't tell the others. The next day, another student went missing. They found his body just beyond the trench, buried up to his neck, his mouth filled with soil, his arms bent behind him at unnatural angles. A single word was scratched into the ground beside him. Latin, hurried, etched with a blade. Non-excaves. Do not dig. The wind had stopped. That was the first thing Dr. Eleanor Hughes noticed when she stepped from her tent at dawn. The early air held no chill, no movement. The trees surrounding the camp were motionless, as though the entire forest had taken a collective breath and refused to release it. She walked to Jacob's cairn. The stones were scattered, toppled as if by a careless hand or a violent tremor. One had split cleanly in two. Beneath it, the soil was churned, loose and wet. Something had pushed up from below, or clawed its way out. The nausea returned in waves. Eleanor knelt, brushing her fingers across the damp soil. It was still warm. When she lifted her hand, the scent of ash lingered faintly on her fingertips. Behind her, boots scraped softly against the gravel. It was Thomas. He stood stiffly at the edge of the clearing, arms folded tightly across his chest. His face was pale, drawn tight around the eyes. "I'm leaving," he said. "You can't just..." Eleanor started. "I saw something last night." His voice was thin and stretched. "It was wrong. We dug too deep. They didn't want to be found." Eleanor wanted to argue. Instead, she nodded. Thomas left that morning without taking his things. He wasn't the last. 3 more team members left over the following 2 days, some in the daylight. Others simply vanished between dusk and dawn. No messages, no notes, only empty sleeping bags and half-zipped tents left behind like husks. And then came the silence. It wasn't just the absence of conversation or footsteps. Nature had grown quiet too. No birdsong, no insects, just an oppressive stillness, as if the land itself was waiting for something to happen. And then it did. It was just past midnight when Eleanor was jolted awake by the low hum of static. The battery-powered radio by her cot hissed with a dry burst of sound. She hadn't touched it in days. When she sat up, the hum grew louder, deeper, like the sound of distant thunder rolling beneath the ground. Then Claire screamed. Eleanor threw open the tent flap just in time to see her dragged across the clearing, heels scraping twin trails through the soil. Her arms flailed, mouth gaping in a soundless cry as she disappeared into the trees. Flashlights snapped on. Men and women stumbled from tents in confusion. One student bolted into the woods after Claire. He was never seen again. They found her at dawn, nailed to the dig site sign with rusted iron stakes. Her arms were twisted back unnaturally, bones snapped and protruding from the skin. Her eyes had been removed, and her mouth was sewn shut with sinew. Symbols were carved deep into her torso. Latin phrases in ornate loops and jagged slashes. One phrase stood out: De profundis clamavi a te, Domine. From the depths I cry to you, O Lord. Eleanor stared at the message for a long time, her mouth dry. Claire's corpse was buried without ceremony, under a tarp weighted with stone. Nobody wanted to go near the cairn again. After that night, Eleanor began hearing them. Voices, not quite whispers, closer to echoes. Latin fragments drifted through the camp on no wind. She would wake with old phrases on her lips, some of which she couldn't remember learning. Others in the camp heard them too, though no one spoke openly of it. One by one, the remaining students and staff left. Those who stayed did so without understanding why. Eleanor found herself unable to leave, bound to the trench like it held her name. And then the shadows began to move. She caught glimpses of figures in the tree line, tall shapes wrapped in cloaks, heads glinting with iron. They didn't move like people. They stood perfectly still, always watching, sometimes disappearing between one blink and the next. The air around the trench grew colder each night. Frost curled along the edges of unearthed stones, even in the heat of July. She stopped sleeping. Her dreams, when they came, were filled with fire. One night, Eleanor found herself walking, barefoot across sharp gravel, arms limp at her sides. She didn't know when she'd left the tent. Her feet were bleeding. Her breath fogged the air, even though it wasn't cold. She stood before the trench. The skeleton was no longer there. In its place, the The soil had sunken inward, forming a narrow pit lined with broken bones. The edges were sharp, too clean, like the grave itself had been carved rather than collapsed. The earth trembled. Then a voice, not out loud, but inside her skull, like a splinter of thought jammed too deep.
Sagellum fractum est. Sagellum fractum est.
The seal is broken. She backed away, stumbled, fell. Her hand grazed something hot. The sword, still embedded in the mud, still etched with that cursed name. Marcus Severus. She couldn't breathe. Her vision shimmered, danced with shadow. Shapes emerged from the woods. 10 of them. Figures in broken armour, their bodies charred and twisted. One dragged the shattered shield behind him. Another carried a banner in skeletal hands, its cloth rotted to ribbons, stained black. They circled the trench, silent, staring. And then came the 11th, larger than the others. His armour scorched and fused to his body, half of his face peeled away like melted wax. One eye socket was empty. The other glowed with ember light. In his hand, he held a gladius, its blade still slick with something wet and red. He stepped forward. Eleanor's body locked. Muscles refused to move.
Tescus.
Witness, came the voice. His mouth did not move.
Foederis fregisti.
You broke the covenant. She tried to scream. He raised the sword, not in threat, but as a signal. Around her, the others drew their weapons.
I am known to remember that.
Now the 9th walks again. They stamped their feet in unison. The earth groaned beneath them. The trench widened, opening like a wound. From the pit, smoke billowed, and with it, hands, blackened, twisted, clawed, grasping, trying to rise. Eleanor fled. She ran until her legs gave out, crawled the rest of the way back to the tent. When she awoke, it was morning, and the camp was empty, not abandoned, erased, tents gone, tools vanished. Not a footprint remained in the soil, only the pit and the silence. She tried to leave, packed her bag, drove the jeep until the fuel gauge warned empty. The forest never changed, the same bend in the road, the same crumbling stone wall, the same gnarled tree. Every time she turned around, the trench was waiting. The 9th had made her part of the story. Now, at night, she sleeps beside the pit, though not always by choice. Something draws her to it, night after night. She whispers in her sleep, ancient chants in dead tongues. She is not alone. The ground never stops whispering, and sometimes, just before dawn, she hears the faint sound of marching, boots, metal, closer each night. The sky never seemed to darken anymore. It simply turned grey and hung there, like a shroud stretched too tight over a rotting corpse. And Eleanor Hughes had stopped sleeping. Something in her refused the quiet. Every time her eyes slipped shut, she could feel them, watching, listening, waiting. She lit a fire every night now, not for warmth, but as a barrier. The flames crackled, casting flickering shadows across the dig site, but the light never seemed to reach far enough. Beyond the circle, darkness pressed in like a rising tide. She could see things moving just beyond its reach, helmets glinting, spears shifting. Once, she saw a face half submerged in the soil, eyes wide and weeping ash. She whispered Latin verses without knowing what they meant. The trench no longer resembled anything man-made. It was a wound in the world, its sides scorched black, bleeding steam and rot. The earth surrounding it had cracked open like flesh flayed beneath the skin. The sword, the cursed gladius of Marcus Severus, remained embedded in the center, vibrating with a low hum that set Eleanor's teeth on edge. She tried covering the pit once, took every remaining tarp, every tool, and spread them across the mouth of the trench. It was all gone the next morning, torn to shreds, burned around the edges, as though something had clawed its way out from below. She wanted to leave. Her bones screamed for escape, but something, some presence, kept her rooted. Every time she packed a bag and stepped to the edge of the forest road, she would turn back, or black out. And when she awoke, she'd be lying by the trench again, soil in her mouth, her fingernails caked with blood. That's when the crows came, hundreds of them. They arrived at dusk, lining the trees, their eyes glassy and unblinking. They didn't caw, they didn't move. They simply sat and stared at her like sentinels from another world. Their feathers looked burnt, smouldering at the tips. That night, she saw the first of the risen. It began with a sound, metal scraping against stone. Then came the soft rhythm of marching. Not footsteps, but the heavy thud of iron sandals on ancient Roman roads. And then, through the smoke, came Marcus Severus. He stepped from the trench like a corpse dragged from the sea. His face was a ruin, flesh sloughing off the skull, one eye socket hollow, the other glowing dimly. His armour was twisted and fused to his body, molten iron cooled into the shape of his agony. Black ichor dripped from his fingertips. Behind him, one by one, the legion emerged, charred, shattered. Some walked with limbs bent the wrong way. Others dragged broken shields or rusted weapons still embedded in their chests. One soldier bore no head, yet followed the others as if led by memory alone. They made no sound, not even the wind stirred. Eleanor backed away, torch trembling in her hand. Her lips moved without her willing them. Av, nona legio. Av, mortui. The words tasted like ash. Marcus Severus lifted his gladius, not in threat, but in command. The legion froze. And then, from behind Eleanor, came the cry. A scream not of pain, but of recognition. A young man. A voice she hadn't heard in days. Liam, the last of her students who'd refused to leave. She turned just in time to see his body dragged into the trench, his face twisted in horror, his fingernails clawing furrows in the ground. "Liam!" she shrieked, stumbling forward. But Severus turned, raised his palm, and Eleanor stopped mid-step. She couldn't move, not from fear, but because her body was no longer hers. Her limbs refused her will. Her tongue grew heavy. Her eyes rolled back as visions flooded her mind. A Roman fort, engulfed in flames. Women and children impaled on stakes as soldiers prayed beneath a blood-red moon. Marcus Severus stood atop a stone altar, his chest slit open, a dagger in his own hand. A sacrifice to bind something. Screaming, endless screaming. The 9th Legion disappearing into a cursed land, leaving behind only bones and whispers. She awoke vomiting blood. Liam was gone. All that remained was a dark smear at the trench's edge and a set of fingernail scratches carved into the stone. 10 deep gouges, fresh. Eleanor didn't sleep after that. The forest began to change. Bark peeled away from the trees in long strips, revealing veins pulsing beneath the wood. The birds vanished, replaced by swarms of insects that moved as one, buzzing in rhythmic patterns that resembled the marching drums. The soil grew softer, as if rotting from the inside out. One morning, Eleanor's tent collapsed in on itself, ripped apart by unseen hands. When she crawled out, she found dozens of tiny wooden effigies arranged in a circle around her. Each figure had its head twisted backward. Each bore her face. She began to see herself in the pit. Sometimes, when the fog rose, she would catch glimpses of herself standing at the bottom, arms raised in offering. Sometimes she looked older, sometimes younger. Sometimes her face was gone entirely. The crows stopped watching. Now they followed her. When she walked, they hopped after her in neat lines, heads tilted, as if awaiting orders. That night, the ground cracked open near the trench. Something massive stirred beneath. She heard chains break, stone groan, and then a sound, like thousands of teeth grinding in unison. From the darkness, they came again. This time, Eleanor saw their full number. Not 10, not 100, thousands. An army of the dead. Each soldier carried death in his eyes, Roman spectres bound not by honor, but by vengeance. Their armour bore runes that pulsed with unholy fire. Severus led them with no words, only the weight of his presence. He raised his sword and pointed directly at Eleanor. From the ranks, a woman stepped forward. Eleanor recognized her, Claire. But her eyes were sewn shut. Her jaw was unhinged, gaping wide with smoke spilling from within. She opened her arms, and from her mouth came a flood of black worms that crawled toward Eleanor in a slithering tide. She ran, screaming, weeping, her mind cracking apart. The forest welcomed her like a coffin. Branches tore at her face. Roots pulled her ankles. She fell again and again until she collapsed in a clearing she didn't remember existing. In its center stood a stone altar. Old, Roman, stained with centuries of dried blood. Symbols carved around its base matched the ones burned into her skin. Atop it lay a sword, not Severus's but hers. The same gladius, familiar, waiting. She reached out, and the moment her fingers touched the hilt, they screamed. The entire forest, the trench, the legion, the air itself. They screamed in agony and rage as the sky tore open above her, and something vast, ancient, and furious looked down. Eleanor screamed with them. And then, silence. The legion was gone. The pit had closed. She lay there, curled around the sword, the altar warm beneath her cheek. But she knew it wasn't over, not even close. Something had been set in motion. The 9th Legion had risen, and they were not alone. The sword hadn't left her side. Eleanor awoke with the gladius still clutched to her chest. The hilt fused to her palm by dried blood and some darker residue that reeked of burnt bone. The altar was cold now, and the clearing had changed again. The trees encircled her like a jury of giants, their bark split and bleeding sap that shimmered black in the early morning gloom. Birdsong had ceased entirely. No breeze moved the branches, no insects buzzed. The world was holding its breath, as if nature itself feared what had awakened. Eleanor sat up slowly, her back cracking with stiffness. Her vision blurred around the edges. The ground beneath her pulsated gently, like a massive heartbeat echoing from far below.
They never went away.
The voice was behind her, dry as dust, neither man nor woman. She turned. Her figure stood just at the edge of the altar circle, hooded, draped in rags that moved as though underwater. The face was obscured by shadow, but beneath the cowl, she could see hints of rot, of parchment-thin skin stretched over teeth and bone. The smell of ancient tombs poured from the thing like fog.
You've taken a blade. That means you've chosen. They're awake now.
Eleanor's voice cracked as she stood. "I didn't choose anything," she rasped. "I was trying to stop it. I didn't know." The figure moved without sound, appearing suddenly at her side. Its presence chilled her marrow. The forest darkened. The figure melted into the shadows, and Eleanor was alone again. The sword in her hand grew heavier, pulsing with a steady rhythm, like it had a heart of its own. She stumbled back through the trees, toward the trench. She needed to see it, needed to see what had changed. But it was already too late. The trench was no longer a trench. It was a moor, at least 30 feet wide now, its edges scorched black and etched with fresh symbols that glowed with pulsing red light. The remains of the camp were scattered around the edges, torn tents, claw marks in the soil, and blood. So much blood. The scent was metallic and raw, clinging to the air like damp wool. And someone was down there. She saw movement at the bottom of the pit, a twitching shape, crawling. "Hello," she called, half dreading the reply. The figure stopped. Its head turned slowly, too slowly. It began to climb. No tools, no ropes, just fingers. Long, blackened fingers with nails like hooks, dragging itself up the sheer wall of the pit like a spider. It wasn't Liam. Not anymore. His face had split down the middle, the skin peeled back and pinned open with rusted bronze nails. His mouth hung in a frozen scream filled with worms. His eyes were gone, replaced with burning coals. Eleanor backed away, bile rising in her throat. "Liam," she whispered. The thing smiled.
He screamed for you.
Then it lunged. She turned and ran, crashing through the forest, thorns tearing at her face, her lungs burning. She heard others now, footsteps that didn't match the weight of flesh, armour clattering softly, the distant hum of Latin chants whispered by throats long rotted. They were everywhere. Shapes moved behind every tree, half-seen silhouettes dragging weapons, mouths sewn shut, eyes bleeding smoke. The Legion was hunting. She reached the old storage cabin, the one used to house tools and artifacts. Slamming the door behind her, she threw the bolt and fell to the floor, panting. Silence returned, and then scratching, soft, deliberate, dozens of nails across wood. She turned toward the far wall and saw the words Ave Infernus carved deep into the wood, the letters still smoking. Below them, a fresh set of eyes, human, still wet, had been embedded in the cracks. From the ceiling, black ichor began to drip. She backed into the corner, sword clutched tight, trembling. There was a window. She could escape. The window exploded inward. A hand reached through, gaunt, armoured, grasping. It missed her face by inches, then withdrew as quickly as it had come. She scrambled up, threw the sword at the door. It embedded deep into the wood, glowing white hot, and dove through the window into the night. The air outside was thicker, wrong. The sky had turned red, not just sunset red, but arterial, like the entire atmosphere was made of open wounds. From the tree line, Eleanor saw the Legion emerge again. No longer shadows. Now they marched in full. Hundreds of them. Spears, gladi, rusted banners fluttering in wind that didn't exist. Some rode horses whose flesh had long since melted away, sinew hanging from bone, eyes glowing. And at the front stood Severus. He lifted his sword, and the world stopped. Not in silence, but in a terrible vibration. The trees shook, the air hummed. The trench behind her erupted, not with earth, but with hands. Dozens of them, crawling from the soil, grasping for purchase. Children, women, civilians long buried beneath the fort's cursed soil. They moaned like rusted gates. Their bodies twisted unnaturally, folding backwards as they emerged, as if reborn in pain. Eleanor screamed, but there was nowhere left to run. The Legion closed in. Severus reached her. He placed a dagger at her hand, an ancient ritual blade carved from obsidian. She looked down at it, then up at the undead crowd gathering around her. They weren't here for vengeance anymore. They were here for a ritual, and she was to complete it. The obsidian dagger was heavier than Eleanor expected. Cold and jagged in her palm, it seemed to pulse with an unnatural life of its own, vibrating against her skin like a heartbeat from another world. Around her, the Ninth Legion formed a tightening circle, faces twisted in eternal torment, eyes burning with a terrible hunger. The once green forest had turned blackened and withered, branches clawing at the sky as if begging for release. The trench, the yawning maw of death, gurgled beneath their feet, the voices of the dead rising like a subterranean chorus. Marcus Severus hissed, his voice like iron scraping stone. Eleanor's breath came ragged. Her wrist throbbed fiercely where the runes burned red. The sword she had carried lay forgotten at her side, replaced now by the grim reality in her hand. She glanced around, desperate for a way out, but the Legion's gaze held no mercy, no compassion, only cold purpose. The cursed army was not bound to any earthly law. Their hunger was eternal. "Why me?" she whispered, tears streaming down dirt-streaked cheeks. "Why must I pay for their sins?" Severus stepped forward, the glow of his half-burnt eye intensifying. His twisted armour seemed to fuse with the ground beneath him, roots of darkness wrapping around his feet. Eleanor's fingers tightened around the dagger. She looked down at the blade, its edges shimmering with a liquid darkness. A sound shattered the stillness. Footsteps, not slow or marching, but running. "Eleanor!" The voice was hoarse, frantic. It was David, one of the other archaeologists, the only one who hadn't fled or succumbed to madness. He burst into the clearing clutching a bundle of ancient scrolls and a crucifix-shaped relic. His eyes were wild, terrified but burning with determination. "You don't have to do this," he yelled. "There's a way to stop them. A ritual to seal the Legion back into the earth." Severus turned toward David, raising his sword above his head, and the temperature dropped further. A breath of frost passed over the clearing. David raised the relic, chanting in Latin with trembling lips. The air pulsed, and the runes on Eleanor's wrist flared violently. The trench behind Severus shuddered. From its depths, more hands emerged, rotting fingers grasping desperately. Eleanor's heart pounded as the Legion closed ranks. David moved closer, eyes fixed on Eleanor. "You have to offer a token of blood, your own, but not to them." He reached out, hand trembling toward her wrist. Suddenly, Eleanor's vision blurred. The voices of the dead surged into her mind, screams, curses, whispered pleas. She fell to her knees, the dagger slipping from her fingers. The runes burned brighter than ever. In that moment, she understood. The Legion was not just an enemy. They were a part of her now. Their pain, their rage, their betrayal, etched into her soul. But there was still one choice left. With trembling resolve, Eleanor seized the dagger again. She raised it to her palm, then plunged it deep. Pain unlike anything she'd ever known exploded through her veins, a white-hot inferno that clawed at her very being. Blood poured freely, and the runes on her skin blazed with light. The Legion halted. Severus's gaze flickered with confusion. Then rage. Eleanor chanted the ancient words David had taught her, her voice trembling but growing stronger with each syllable. The blood seeped into the earth, steaming as it touched the trench's edge. The ground shook violently. The Legion howled. a sound of rage and despair that split the night. One by one, the spectral soldiers faltered, their forms dissolving into ash and mist. Severus screamed, a sound that echoed through the forest like a dying storm. The trench began to close, the earth swallowing the moor, burying the curse once more. Eleanor collapsed, bloodied and exhausted, the sword and dagger falling from her grasp. David knelt beside her, pressing a hand to her forehead. "It's over," he whispered. But Eleanor knew better. The scars on her skin would never fade. The Legion's curse had passed into her blood, and as the forest grew silent once more, she understood that some wars never end. They only wait. Thank you for listening to Whispers in the Dark. If you'd like to support the show, head over to our Patreon, where you can sign up to one of 3 different tiers. Or if you'd prefer to make a one-off contribution, maybe you'd like to buy me a coffee or show support through our website at Buzzsprout. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube to stay up to date with new episodes, behind-the-scenes content, and more chilling tales. Music written and composed by Roman Dudchik. Join us next time for the final tale of the series. And remember, you've heard the whispers. But some doors, once opened, never truly close. If you feel something watching tonight, don't look back. We'll see you next time. If the dark lets you go.